We are in the middle of a series entitled One God, One Plan, One You. And our idea for this series came from the fact that we oftentimes, and I come across people who say, well, I don't like the God of the Old Testament. It's a God of wrath and punishment. But I like the God of the New Testament. And so clearly in my brain that's a problem because God is. He was, and He is, and He forevermore will be the same. And so our idea was to go through the Bible and to start in Genesis and then take the law, so that's the 5 books, and then to go to the books of history, and then to the prophets, and then to wisdom, and then to the Gospels, and then to the epistles, and then to the New Testament, and end with New Testament prophecy. So to take each section of Scripture and to show that we have one God, you got one human, there's one you, and He's got one plan. From the beginning to the end, He's got one plan. And as we've said, that one plan is intimacy through grace. Now, why out of all the books of history would I choose a passage like this? And that's a legit question. But I've read the books of history, and I know there's awesome stuff in there. On Wednesday night, men, we're going through Joshua. That's the first book of history. How could we not hang out in there? Right? He said, be strong and courageous. Then again, he said, be strong and courageous. And again, so, wow, I love that book. That's why we're doing it. But the walls of Jericho come crumbling down. We have Rahab. It's grace, right? One plan. Grace, intimacy through grace. Rahab. We could have gone there, but we didn't. I'm not going to go through every one we could have done, I promise that we didn't. But next comes Judges. And we think of Judges, and I kind of was, I love Judges. I preach often on Judges. We have Othniel, and we have Ehud, and we have Shamgar, and we have, all sorts of them that we could go to. We have Deborah. We have Gideon. We have Samson. Okay, skip Samson. Okay? No, but there's grace even in the Samson story, so we could even do that one. But we didn't choose any of those either. So after the Judges, the children of Israel wanted what? Just like everybody else around them, they had a what, Steve? And what did they want after Judges? They wanted a king. Everybody else has a king. I just want a king. Kind of like keeping up with the Joneses a little bit. Right? Everybody else has one, and so they wanted one too. And so when they did that, God anointed Saul. And Saul was a okay king for a while. And then, you know the story of Saul when David and Goliath. Right? David actually fought the Philistines for King Saul. Now, how would we not use that story if we're talking about history? That's a classic. Everybody here knows David and Goliath. Why wouldn't we just hang out there? Well, I think we'll find out why. So David goes from that. King Saul then goes south. God promises that David's going to be king, which takes us up to our passage today. David is riding a pretty good wave. Okay, life is going his way. Saul was killed in battle. This sort of civil war thing that they had going on is now done. David is the king. Undisputed heavyweight champion. He is the king. He just conquers the Philistines again. It's funny how they don't go away, isn't it? He conquers them again, and then we get to chapter 6. David is things are rolling his way. He's riding a good wave. That's what surfers would say. That's not what I say. I say things are going well. Okay? Now, why would we choose this passage? Well, because I think that oftentimes in life, I call it the success syndrome. When things are going really well, we forget where to turn. When things are going poorly, we have nowhere else to turn. But when things are going really, really well, when we're riding a really good wave, we forget where to turn. Well, here's the good news. David didn't. David, even in his success, we have something to learn from him. In his success, what did he want to do? Now, I understand that there's some political reasons why he would want to bring the Ark of the Covenant back. The Ark of the Covenant represented the very presence of God. And it was stolen 20 years ago by the Philistines. After they took this Ark of the Covenant, which there's a picture of on your worship folder, after they took that, things didn't go very well for them. They got sick, they were miserable. They stuck it on an ox cart and slapped the ox on the backside and sent him towards Jerusalem. Get that thing out of here. Well, it didn't make it all the way to Jerusalem. It got stuck in the house of Deb, right? It's a hard one. And so it was there for a while. David says, I'm bringing it back to the city. And so when he does, they get it out of storage. They may blow the dust off of it a little bit, but they don't touch it. They blow the dust off of it a little bit. They load it on the ox cart. We're told a new ox cart, so it's not the same ox cart that the Philistines put it on. They loaded on a new ox cart, and away they went. And they headed to Jerusalem. Now, why is that important? David, in his success, turned to God. David did not suffer from success syndrome at this point in his life. Things were going very well, and he knew why. And that led him to want more intimacy with God. And that's the title of today, is Quest for Intimacy with God. And David wanted it. That's why he wanted to bring the Ark of the Covenant. He wanted the very presence of God symbolically to be with him, intimately with God. So you take the risk, you bring it. And I would say this, that symbolically it's not a lot different than what we just did in communion. Right? Do we think that Jesus, that's really Jesus' blood, that's really Jesus' body? You know, that's not our belief. We believe through the power of the Holy Spirit there's something supernatural that goes on there. But it's symbolic. Okay? Now, David symbolically wanted the very presence of God and the Ark of the Covenant to be with him because he wanted that intimacy. Now, it didn't go very well for him because of Ahaz. And I know it's spelled with a U, but it's pronounced Ahaz, promise. As he was bringing this thing back, the ox trips, he reaches to grab the Ark of the Covenant, and God strikes him dead. Don't you love this story? Now, I chose this for the specific reason that when people tell me that the God of the Old Testament is a God of wrath and a God of punishment, you read stuff like this and you're like, okay, you're right. I get it. And so this sort of thing causes people to stumble in their faith. How can I worship a God that's going to kill a guy for reaching out to grab the Ark of the Covenant? It seems like such a noble thing to do. I mean, it was going to fall on the ground. As Eugene Peterson said, Uzziah was not killed suddenly. He had been dying for a long time. And what we know about Uzziah is that Ahaz, I'll pronounce it right, okay? U-Z-Z-A-H, okay, that guy. What we know about him is that he must have been part of, and stick with me, and I love our U.S. military, okay, so don't take this the wrong way, but he must have been a part of the SEAL Team 6, comparatively. Okay? Because we know some things about the Ark of the Covenant and the people who were allowed to be around it and the people that are allowed to cover it. And so we know there's 3 laws. There's 3 things that they cannot do. And So number one is it's always to be carried. It's not supposed to ride on ox carts. It's always supposed to be carried. That's why we have the eyelets, or the round things with the poles in them. And it's to be carried by SEAL Team 6 people. That's the second law. It has to be carried by specific Levites. It's not just any Levite can go in. Not any priest can just go in there and carry the Ark of the Covenant. It has to be specific ones, specific trained ones. So it's not just any American that can go. It's not just any child of Israel that can go. It's a military man. So it's a Levite, but it's not just any Marine or any Navy person. It's a SEAL, and it's not just any, you get the point. It's this top of the line guy, and so he knows this. That this is what's required. It's not to ride on carts. It's supposed to be carried. It's only to be carried by specific people. And the final thing is, it is never, ever to be touched. What a God of rules and regulations, huh? But Ahaz did know those rules and regulations. And he went to the house where it was stored, and he put it on a new cart. We're told specifically these actions were taken. They took it off of where it was, however they did it, from the old cart, put it on the new cart. This was his plan to get it to David. This was his plan to get it to Jerusalem. He was breaking the plan. Now, don't get me wrong, I would rather put something really heavy on an ox cart too. So I understand it. But it was against God's way. An ox is not a Levite. It's not being carried by a Levite. Not carried the right way. And so all of a sudden, we see this pattern of not doing things God's way, even though he has to know him because he's the top of the top. He's a SEAL Team 6 guy. He doesn't do them the right way. And then all of a sudden, the ox starts to stumble. He reaches out to grab. And he's killed. Now, that seems like why he was just trying to save the Ark of the Covenant from hitting the ground, right? Who wouldn't do that? I mean, you don't want it to get dirty. But here's the point. That's not against the rules. God said nothing about the Ark of the Covenant getting dirty. If it hits the soil, big deal. What did God say? Don't touch it. Out of reverence and respect for who I am, for my presence, out of respect for me, do not do this. And so if we boil this sin down deep enough, stick with me. If we boil this sin down deep enough, was this a sin of touching the Ark of the Covenant? No. Was this a sin of putting the Ark of the Covenant on an ox cart instead of carrying it on the poles like they're supposed to? No. Was this allowing the wrong people to participate in the carrying of the Ark of the Covenant? No. This was a sin of him thinking he could do it his own way, his own time, that his thinking was above the thinking of God. Which takes us right back to the Garden of Eden. Which puts us right back to this sin covering that we've talked about, right? It's the same sin. At some level, I know better than God. So fast forward to David. And in this specific passage, David does things right. In this particular passage, David then is terrified because the death of one of his men. And he says, get that thing out of here. Why? Because David knew he was not a perfect man either. He knew that if that's what happened to imperfect people, he was in trouble. But here's the difference between Uzzah and David. Uzzah didn't believe. He believed that he knew better than God. David believed and knew God knew better than him. Was David a perfect man? No. Did David go on to do a lot of really horrible things? Yep. So God had a plan. One God, one person. Let's start with the first one, Uzzah. Whew, that's hard. How many times have I said this and I still don't have it right? One plan for him, right? Intimacy through grace. He sinned. Yeah, okay. So what's God's plan to restore him? Intimacy through grace. But how do you get that? The same way that Adam and Eve did. The same way that Abraham did. Through believing. You know how you receive intimacy through grace? By believing. Uzzah did not believe. He thought he knew better than God. David did believe, as we're told. We're told he's a man after God's own heart in time. He repented when he was wrong. So therefore we have one plan. Intimacy through grace. Now, the end of this passage is one that you guys know me real well. You know I'm one that takes any opportunity to cut the rug up that I can. And so, I thought we'd just end today, with a nice celebration and big dance party as David had. All right? So, no? Yeah, oh yeah, you're for it. You're not saying, I don't blame you. I don't want to see me try it either. But you understand that that's David's position here. That for 3 months he's like, okay, I'm not perfect either. I'm in trouble. If everything that's imperfect is going to go and that touches or comes around the Ark of the Covenant is going to die, I'm in trouble. He believed that was true. I'm in trouble. So we're told that it goes to somebody who is not perfect. How do we know that? Well, he was a foreigner. And that was not perfect in those days. He spent the time in the house of a foreigner. And God blessed him. And blessed him. And blessed his entire family. And when David heard wind of this, David said, maybe there's hope for me too. Maybe, if he's going to bless a foreigner in his presence in the Ark of the Covenant, maybe there's hope for me also. And so David believes and is restored. They bring the Ark of the Covenant and he dances a little jig, right? Is that what we're told? He dances a little bit? What? With his ephod? Yeah, let's not go that far, okay? But yeah, I was prepared to dance. I wasn't prepared to do that. We're told he danced with all his might. You ever danced with all your might to celebrate something? To celebrate intimacy with God? Danced with all your might. And he gets made fun of for it. That's the part I love. Because anything you do with all your might, and hear me, New Hope, okay? Anything that we're going to do with all of our might going forward, we're going to get made fun of. We're going to be told it's not going to work. They're going to think we're crazy, and they're probably right. But that's okay. We thought David was crazy too. He's dancing with all of his might, which is very undignified, we're told. And he told his wife, who told him, you're a goofball and what you did was not right for a king. And he told her, you know what? I'd do even more undignified things than that for how much I love the God who saved me. I would do more than dance half naked with all of my might to celebrate what God has done for me. One God, Old Testament, New Testament, Intertestament, beginning, end, one God. There's one you. There's one me. And God has one plan for restoring our relationship together. And that's intimacy through grace. Now we know, and we just celebrated, that for us, Jesus Christ sacrificed, covered his blood on our behalf, that we could be in him. In him. And when we believe, the difference is belief. When you believe, you have intimacy through grace. When you do not believe, you're playing with fire. Just like Uzzah. When you do not believe, you're playing with fire. So please, New Hopers, accept intimacy through grace, through faith in Jesus Christ. Let's pray together. Heavenly